Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Yes, it is good to have you back. I mean that with a sincere heart. This time, stakeholder management. Notice in the PMBOK Guide or read his book, stakeholder management is chapter 13. That's because I mentioned that stakeholders and communications used to be in the same chapter in PMBOK Guide version 4. In PMBOK Guide version 5, they broke it apart into their own chapters. To me, it is the most important chapter. Everything we do, our success, is designed or defined by stakeholder satisfaction. So, it should be taught up front. To me, what they did was they broke it out, said, let's make it its own chapter. That's good. It deserves some attention. And they put it at the end of the book. It needs to be up front, and that's why we discuss it here. Your next conversation with me will be in communications management, because again, even though they're separate chapters, I want you to think of them together. As you talk stakeholder, talk comm. As you talk comm, think stakeholders, back and forth. These are your objectives for today. And here we are. These are the process groups. Notice here in red is stakeholder management. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 processes. We're going to identify stakeholders in initiating process group. Then in planning, we're going to plan stakeholder engagement. In executing, we're going to manage. Notice the word manage in executing. And in controlling, we are going to monitor stakeholder engagement. And that's the big picture. That's where we fall in this knowledge area. Remember, this is the IPAC overview we had in the first week. So remember, this is just kind of a big picture about where we're going. Notice in the initiating process group, I am identifying stakeholders, and my key output will be right here, the stakeholder register. And that's a list of stakeholders, their needs, expectations, their roles, what is success to them. That's why if you can sit in on project selection, it's gold for filling out the register. But if not, you'll figure it out with your team. And then you always then working towards planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. Notice stakeholders here. Your sponsor will sign the charter. There's a key stakeholder. Your sponsor will sign off the project plan. You'll have stakeholders at your kickoff. You will update stakeholders when you do changes to the project plan. That's what that term means there. So you will collect change inputs from various stakeholders, process owners, and others along the way. You will get stakeholders to sign off, like the customer and your sponsor, during closing either the project or phase. So it's very important, this conversation. Now here we are. There are 4 processes and stakeholders. So stakeholder management, we already defined in the key terms, was to identify stakeholders. And stakeholders are people, group, or organizations that can be impacted or can impact the project in either a positive or negative way. And so it's in this area that we want to analyze the stakeholders and develop a strategy to engage them. Okay? So we're going to use these 4 processes: identify stakeholders, plan stakeholder engagement, which is about their needs, manage them, which is about communicating to foster engagement, writing their issues down on an issues log, and collecting change requests. And then monitoring stakeholders, which is about adjusting your strategy. Notice they don't use the term change here, even though this is monitor is a change management process. If you look on page 25 of the PMBOK Guide, they call it monitor because people don't like to be controlled. It's a control process. People don't like to be controlled, so we call it monitor, right? We're really adjusting strategy to make our project, which is a strategic corporate objective, come true. Now, I go back to defining a stakeholder. In red is the shorthand. In red and blue is the overall definition. So in red, it's just an individual. It's someone that's affected by a decision in the project, right? And as long as you know that someone can be an individual, a group, or an organization. And so I first want to identify stakeholders, and I want to do this regularly. I don't do it once, I do it regularly. So let me go back to this slide and say, by process, when do I identify all stakeholders? All in the initiating process group in the process called Identify Stakeholders. I get a stakeholder register which lists all, desk pounding, all stakeholders. Now, I will notice I ID stakeholders throughout my project. In the military, we move every 2 years. I would have new stakeholders all the time. When I do always philosophically identify stakeholders, I put them back in the initiating process group to add them to the stakeholder register, so it has all stakeholders on it. And this is really the process to identify stakeholders. I do it regularly, and I analyze the information to ensure project success. Now, what are some examples of stakeholders, right? How is a stakeholder a group? Well, it might be a regional boss. It might be a union boss. A union is a group, right? It might be a particular user, right? It might be an analyst. Might be the customer or customers. Might be coworkers or contractors. Maybe a volunteer organization that's helping us out. Remember, around the edge, it's any person, group, or organization impacted positively or negatively or affected by a decision or outcome of the project. So around the edge, you have the definition of a stakeholder, and in the middle in this box, I try and show examples of stakeholders. And stakeholders are very important because they give us the project requirements, success criteria, risks, constraints, assumptions. I'd even add quality standards to that, right? So we get a lot from the stakeholders. But be careful because they can drive us to scope creep. Andy, I think you need to add this in the project. Well, okay. What is your justification? Great. Do a change request and we'll look at it. I will process it. So you want to be careful. Now, in building this, we want to, I just take a moment. Please read this slide, pause the video, because what you want to do is look at page 25 and memorize all of the processes there. Because one of the value is that the output of one process generally becomes an input to the next process. Okay? And so an output to develop project charter 4.1, if you look on page 25 right now, an output is the charter. Well, the charter then, as an output of that process, becomes an input to both identify stakeholders down below and look to your right. The next process is develop project management plan. That output of a charter is going to be an input to both of those. So that chart is very useful. The other note I like to make early up front, and this applies to all knowledge areas, all right, these items, is that tools and techniques are divided into basic categories: data gathering, data analysis, comm skills, decision making, interpersonal, and team skills. Know that. Just know also that those terms are the tools and techniques, but they will mean different things in the various processes. We'll go through that in detail. This is just a one-slide summary of ITTOs, inputs, tools, and techniques, and outputs that you should understand before going forward. And it's applicable to every knowledge area we're going to talk about in the rest of the course: scope, schedule, cost, risk, quality, communications, procurement, etc. Okay? All right, so the first process is to identify stakeholders. Notice I list, and if you want more information, you could go back to section 13.1 of the PMBOK guide. You should have read it for yourself already. And it has your inputs, your tools and techniques, and outputs. Every process has them, right? So your inputs, your project charter, is an input to identifying stakeholders. That makes sense because that was an output of the process just prior. Okay, and a charter is always at the high level. Another input are your business documents. So when you look at this slide, that makes sense. So here's my project charter 4.1, an input, or my identify stakeholders 13.1. An input is both the business documents that I did that were done that kicked off this project and the output of this first process. Both become inputs to identify stakeholders. So it's really pretty easy to think through. So the project management plan, and at this point we don't have a lot built from the project management plan, so basically it's whatever we have. Let me go back to here. The business documents come in two types, and you should pencil these in on your notes. It's the business case and the benefits management plan. Just kind of a quick review. It's a celebration of knowledge, yay. And then project documents, which are closely associated with the identify stakeholders. And I would say that's the communications management plan, and I would even add the stakeholder engagement plan would be answers I would plug in there. Right, then we have our project documents. Any agreements, these are like contracts, but could be service level agreements, memorandums of understanding, memorandums of agreement, MOAs or MOUs, and ISAs, Internet Service Agreements, for example, and EEFs and OPAs. We've discussed these at length already. Now, my tools and techniques are expert judgment. That's specialized knowledge, like politics, power. At this point, what about the stakeholders? So when I say expert judgment is specialized knowledge, that's the basic definition, but it's really a specialized knowledge in stakeholder management, like a business analyst might bring. There's data gathering, which I summarize the tools and techniques. In this case, I mean brainstorming. And whenever we say brainstorming, I want you to also think of brain writing. Brainstorming, I give the prompts out as we begin the session together. Brain writing, I will share the prompts in advance so that you can think about it. Data analysis, which is going to lead us to stakeholder analysis, and data representation. How do I show this stakeholder data? And I'm going to do it in either a stakeholder grid or a cube or a salience model, which I will describe in the next couple of chapters. Now, the process is called identify stakeholders, so my output is easy. It's a stakeholder register. A register is just a list. We'll do the same in risk management. We'll have a risk register as an output to identify risks. And it's just my list of risks. Well, this is just a list of stakeholders with the things that are important to them. Now, another output are change requests, because whenever I'm identifying stakeholders, they sometimes lead to changes. Then I want to update the project plan and documents as appropriate. This is an example of a stakeholder risk register. Notice I'm going to list the project manager and the project phase because I'm identifying all stakeholders, but I will do it over and over time. This is their role, some contact information, their interest in the project, their influence. This person color-coded it. What are their expectations? And what are their communications requirements? Those are great things to have on a stakeholder register, because that's going to lead me to the next thing, which is the data representation tools, which we will come back and pick up with in the next section of stakeholder management.